Welcome. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce my dear Talmud, Kivi, Perlman, and his wife, Tamar. My relationship with Kivi goes back 30 some odd years when he was a Talmud of mine in 11th grade. He embodies the expression of Chazal, Mitalmidai yosim mikulam. From your students, you learn more than anybody else. In my personal life, over the last 30 years, when I had challenges within my home, within my kehillah, I turned to Kivi for strength and for guidance. Kivi has, together in life, we've traveled and we've learned certain lessons. I believe we can express it in last week's parsha. The Torah describes Lavan's engagement with Yaakov Avinu. Lavan refers to his children as Banai, the children are mine, as if they are a possession. Yaakov refers to them as Achim. He refers to his own children as his brothers. Rashi explains, because they were brothers in arms. When times were difficult, at a time of tzara, at a time of milchama, Yaakov turned to his children and dealt with them as brothers, validating each person's opinion and relying on them for strength and for guidance. Kivi, thank you for everything you've done for me for the last 30 years.
Hey everybody, we want to welcome you into our dining room as we have a discussion with one another, with you, about parenting, about humility, about what it means to remain connected in a very unknown world. But we want to take this opportunity to speak about what Amudim means to us. I think for many of you know, I'm serving on the clinical advisory board, but I've also been a part of the Amudim family almost since its inception. It's an organization that means the world to us simply because they're saving lives on a daily basis. And saving a life is saving a universe. And they do that in the most beautiful of ways possible. So here we are talking about life, talking about process, talking about parenting, talking about relationships, trying to find ways to infuse love into our own hearts, into our own homes. And we hope you enjoy. I know for myself, I always wonder how you feel about this, but for myself, speaking about many different subjects, I often feel competent, I feel engaged, I feel secure. Anytime I speak about parenting, there's often like this imposter syndrome that overcomes me and a feeling of like, what right do I have to speak about this?
Yes.
This very humbling process, one that there's no real way to get it right. There's no real way to get it perfect. The best way to approach it is almost one where you're engaged in it and you're thinking about it and you're conscientious about what it means and what it means to us and what it means to our children. But it always humbles me. And the one thing I know about this process is that different than every other topic that we might discuss is that it's a topic that we're all in it together. There's no one that's separated from the crowd. There's no one that stands out. I think there are those, you stand out by the degree of conscientiousness, much more so than the product or the result. And we put in our effort, and then it's bestowed upon us the ability to see the beauty in our children. That's the gift that Hashem gives us. But it's something that when we humble ourselves and get to a place where we really understand that this is about humanity and about us as a people trying to stay grounded in what's meaningful about being a parent and what it means to love your children unconditionally for who they are and what they represent. It's something that really humbles me. So I'm sharing this with you and with everyone else that's out there. It's a conversation in our dining room about what it's like to be a parent, the ups and downs, the struggle, and ultimately being in it together. It's interesting, we're both therapists, and I think there's a lot that people say about being therapists and raising kids and what that means for them. I myself am a child of a therapist, and as you see, many of my family members are also therapists as well. But there's certainly an expectation. You walk into a room, there's there's almost an expectation like you have it figured out differently than anybody else. And the truth is, the sheer act of attempting to parent, attempting to guide and to nurture, is one that humbles anybody who's engaged in it. I remember we had an experience which always stands out. We were at I think it was a Chalamoid, if I remember correctly. They had like some event here in Queens where they had all these like bouncy houses and things of that sort, like a trip. And uh, we were there together, and one of our kids started freaking out. There was like an event that happened, and we didn't really know what was going on at the time. And there we were trying to like settle it, and everyone is running around in different places. One of our kids was in excruciating amounts of pain, and we didn't understand what that was about. He was eating cotton candy at the time. We found out a minute later that there was a bee on the cotton candy.
This really happened.
And he ate the bee. The bee didn't exactly like it so much.
Well, he didn't eat the bee. The bee stung his tongue.
Yeah, he still has a mark.
He still has a mark from it. And apparently getting stung by a bee on your tongue is extremely painful.
Right. And there we were trying to parent as best as we could in the unknown, in this environment with all this chaos.
And being watched.
And being watched. And that was a moment. I remember there was a therapist, someone that we know well.
Yeah.
We were in a peer supervision group together.
Yeah.
And she made the comment as she sees us like trying to create some sense of normalcy and what it's like in that moment. Yeah. And she said, she goes, "Oh, look at the two therapists trying to raise their kids." And I still remember that moment.
It was nice. It was like a hug.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it felt like ultimately.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder.
Yeah.
We're in this together. And that's ultimately, I hope, what this conversation is like. One where we speak about some of the things that matter to us, the things that are important. And hopefully we could learn from it just a bit. There are 3 ideas that we would like to cover. We'll take turns with it. One is about attachment and connection in childhood and the importance of it all. And also another idea, which is quite controversial, especially at this particular juncture in time, is unconditional love versus expectations, which is certainly a challenging one, and different styles in parenting, where I think we'd like to speak about a concept that, we're so often raised with the idea that parents need to be unified and exactly the same. And I think if there's one thing that's going to become clear throughout this discussion is that however much we love and care for one another, which we do, we're very different human beings. And being different human beings is going to produce different parenting styles. And how does that play out, with our children? And that's where we want to start. So I want to start with an idea I was learning. We're actually learning this a couple weeks ago. Last week we were talking about it, which was nice. That we're in the process of the Torah where we're talking about Avram Avinu and the tasks that Avram Avinu, the tests that Avram Avinu went through. And there are a few that really stand out. And Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs kind of like spends a lot of time focusing on these dynamics. What does it mean to leave a house, to lech lecha? What does it mean to be tasked with slaughtering your son? What does it mean to be tasked with letting your son go, Yishmael, go on his own? And what could we ultimately learn from these particular elements? They're all about self, all about parenting, all about relationships, and how do we understand it? So with all the questions that are asked, there's certainly a lot to learn about self and parents. And Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs shares one critical idea where he says, all of these stories, all of these tests that Avram Avinu had, they all represent breaking free, breaking away. Avram leaving his household, breaking free from his son, and also letting his son go. They all represent a certain concept. And even though it was challenging for him to go through all these experiences, it was really hard for him to engage in this journey of letting go. Ultimately, that becomes like the fabric of the test. The success was his ability to separate. And there's a lot that's been discussed about helicopter parents and what it means to be very involved in your kids' needs and desires and sort of like superimposing yourself on their being. And one of the lessons that we could take out from these stories is that in order to connect, in order to really connect with self, you need to go through a process of disconnection. You need to see yourself and see your children as an entity that's separate from you. They're connected with us, they're a part of us. But on the other hand, they're also their own autonomous characters, they're their own beings. They're people that need to be valued and nurtured and cherished simply because they are unique and they're them. And they may have elements of us inside of them, but what we celebrate is the fact that there's that separation, there's that difference. I think it's one of the most humbling parts of being a parent. We just had our oldest go into Eretz Yisrael for the first time.
I miss him.
Yeah, and like just the pain, the pain of sending a child away.
Yes.
But then met by the experience of knowing that this is the best for him. This is where he needs to be, where he could discover himself and he could grow and find himself
Yeah.
without our presence, just by himself. And that was really like the process, what you call like Lech Lecha, and also, you know, with the Akiva and sending away his son, learning to value and love another human being with that separation, seeing them as their own individual. And it's an idea that really stays with us, that our children are a part of us, but they're also separate from us. And it's our task to see them as separate characters that we're supposed to nurture them and build them up so they could become their own beings, their own people. They could develop their own families and their own lives for themselves. And I think so often what gets complicated in parenting is that it's so close, it touches the fiber of all of our beings,
Yes.
that it's so hard to see them as separate. We just want to protect and we want to make sure they're okay and never fall in any particular manner, to just be in a space of like sheer fusion. And what we learn from all these stories is that fusion is largely not helpful in helping a person develop to become their own being. It's helpful possibly in the beginning, the early stages of life. But as they begin to age, it's so much more about seeing them as separate characters and how could we nurture them so they could become the best version of themselves. And I know that want to make our way into the world of attachment, and I always love hearing your ideas on that subject.
Yeah, but I'm like thinking about as you're speaking about separation. And I'm thinking like, I think that's in some ways one of the hardest things for me as a parent. And, you know, as the kids get older and like this, the tension between protection and letting go. And I think that we experienced this from the beginning of you know, as a woman, as a mother, the idea of separation, like birth being the first, it being, you know, notoriously a painful experience physically. And I think that as you know, children develop and grow up, the separation continues to hurt, but on a less and less physical level, and it just turns into more emotional and then and psychological, and it ends up actually being an internal process, I think, for the parent. Also, as a therapist, when a client is in like a deep experience and I know that she's touching something new and there's like a new tenderness that's happening and I need to become extremely in tune. So I have to actually kind of quiet all of myself, you know, from like my mind to my senses, to just quiet all the noise inside me, including all the stuff I know about her, because I need to create space for something new and just to create an immense amount of room for her. You know, it's this idea that I've been learning recently of tzimtzum, of like making yourself like so small to give room to the other. And Hashem does tzimtzum for us so that we can grow, so that we have space for ourselves. And this is what you're talking about, like as parents, you know, acting on tzimtzum within our own selves to create space for them. So that's speaking to that idea. So I need to do that. On the other hand, if I do that, but then she has nobody to come back to, and she has no one to kind of fall back into routine with and a rhythm with. And if I'm not there so she can find herself, that's good. But then if I'm not there once she's found herself and I was never there before, then she has nothing to rely on. And it's the same thing with parenting, I find. It's like you were saying, as they get older, we need to do the separation. But if we never had the connection, then it's not separation, it's just lack of connection. And separation isn't a lack of connection. It's being connected and then giving space to them to grow. So that connection at the beginning, that attachment, that early childhood, home stuff, like all the stuff we know about, all the stuff that, happens on this dining room table and on the other dining room tables that have been broken and painted on, which you hate.
I hate paint.
Yeah.
I just feel like it doesn't belong in
But
a home.
it's part of attachment.
You think so? We're putting paint
Yes,
in the category. Oh, it's necessary?
I think so. If you notice, this table does not have any paint on it. And that's my attachment to you.
I very much appreciate that.
But this is a pretty relatively new table, so it's also speaking to that. But I think that being that self, that connection, is that needs to be built throughout and continue to be nurtured throughout. So it's this tension between giving space and then saying, I'm here. And I think that part of that is being able to be a separate person on our own. I think our children want to know that obviously we care about them in every fiber of our being and they impact us. But if they think that our entire self is based on them, that's extremely frightening to them. They need to know that we exist even outside of them and that we exist no matter with what happens with them. And that is for them. It's like you are there and I can lean into you. So that separation needs to be built on that connection. And that separation also fortifies us, which ultimately gives them a safer base. And this, by the way, is, I can't not talk about marriage stuff because that's just interesting.
We're here in our dining room.
I know, it's true.
We might as well.
We might as well, this is like a date, but it's not really.
Cheers.
L'chaim. That when a child learns this process of connection and separation, and he learns during the separation, he needs to be alone, right? So when you let go and you say letting go, that means you're saying you could be on your own. Then the child turns into an adult that knows how to be alone. And an adult that knows how to be alone is also an adult that learns how to be connected. So it's the cycle that feeds itself. If you don't know how to be alone, then you'll end up being lonely because you won't be able to be there for another. You won't be able to modulate yourself. You'll drain the other, so to speak. That's sort of the codependent relationship, right? An often very misunderstood term.
Yeah.
But it's what the ability to be alone is what builds the ability to be connected versus codependent. So sometimes when it's hard for me and thinking of this idea of whatever that letting go is for me, whatever the new stage of letting go, then I think I tap into I'm giving to my child the ability to be alone. And that grounds me for a few moments until it doesn't.
Until you start missing again.
Yes, exactly.
I've always loved the Balby sort of metaphor that he uses. I know Winnicott also uses a similar metaphor.
Yes, of the good enough mother, no.
Yeah, the good enough mother, but the idea that we infuse something in our children.
Yes.
There are different ways of looking at a child. And you could look at a child and see them as a reflection of yourself. And that is like a fusion. That is a connection. It's one and the same. And the message that you implicitly send to that child is that you are me. You're an extension of me. And when they make their way out into the world with that belief, they can't really stand up on their own 2 feet.
Right.
There isn't a sense of I have an identity, I have a being.
Right.
Because their identity is wrapped up in the identity of their parents.
Right. It's a new beginning, but it's a good beginning, but it's not a good process.
Yeah.
Winnicott says that the child learns about himself through the parent, the mirroring. He coined that concept, that he used that word when it comes to that when you smile at a baby, the baby doesn't smile back, and then because he sees you smiling, the baby learns about his own smile because you're smiling. So he's saying that the baby learns about himself through the attachment. These are, a lot of the attachment theories. But you're saying, like, if all you see in your adult baby, it's very easy to smile at a baby, because it doesn't really, you don't have any conflict about it. It's just cute, But what about a grown child? What about, like, a...
Right, in all their difference.
In all their difference, suddenly when it elicits stuff. Yeah, and then we want to control their smile, and we want to impact it, and we want to see on their face what makes us feel good as parents. Yeah. Like, a lot of times it's like, stop being what makes me insecure. So then we want to contort the face, as opposed to what you're saying, like, see the face.
Yeah, that's the flip side of that, is that you either look and there's a mirror, right, and you see yourself, and this is just an extension, or you look and you see their soul. Right. You look at their eyes, and you're not seeing your own reflection, but rather you're seeing them. You're seeing something new. Yeah. It's like the creation of something that's most beautiful and mysterious. And then you ask, like, questions like, who are you? Teach me who you are, and tell me about yourself, and tell me about your nuances and your sense of individuality. And that message somehow gets, like, imprinted on their own being. And when they make their way out into the world, there's a sense of, like, I have a self. Yeah. My self was given to me. It was gifted to me. And I don't have to fight for that identity. I could be different because I was seen as an individual. I was felt as an individual. And I think it's amazing to look at the research of even, like, the first year of childhood and the implications that it has later on in life. It's all pre-verbal. There's nothing, there's no discussion of self at that time. All it is do I see this child as its own entity, or do I see this child as a reflection of myself? Yeah. And its own entity, it introduces us to the world of mystery. I don't know who you are, but I know that you're beautiful, and I know that you're perfect, and you'll teach me about who you are.
And I think a lot of times, as you're talking about this mirror, Kev, like, I'm thinking what parents end up seeing, and this has been, my own personal journey with it also, is that, but I'm almost perfect as a parent, but I'm saying in that almost
Why
part,
almost?
Right, exactly.
Jump right in.
Exactly. Is the piece with when they see something in their child, when we see something in our child that we don't like, then it's hard to see past the regrets, the guilt, the insecurities, our own stuff, our own mistakes, our own questions, our own mysteries and parts of us that we don't like. Right. So we end up, being blinded by our own selves in that way also. I find that this is something that I work a lot with women when it comes to their own. When I see, like, a stuck in a mother, very often what's behind a stuck is guilt and regret. And then as soon as we somehow, like, touch that and quiet it a bit, or at least put it to sleep for now, then, like, what emerges is this, like, uncontrollable compassion, almost like this deep, like, but he's so something, and she's so, and compassion is right underneath it.
Well, there's, like, this parallel process that, like, if we learn to accept our own humanity, and when I mean by humanity, I mean our own flaws, we could accept the fact that we're very imperfect as an individual and as a people. We're just simply imperfect. If we could accept that in ourselves, it becomes so much simpler to accept that in another, certainly in our own children. And it's like, if we can't accept ourselves and our own flaws, we certainly can't accept our children's flaws.
Yes.
And if we can't accept our own, then we could really lean into the fact that we're all trying to figure it out.
Yes.
They're trying to figure it out. We could respect that process.
Yeah. And when we resist that process, we end up resenting the fact that our kids are making us do that process. And we end up blaming them for the process that we have to do. I sometimes say in, like, my lectures that if you're not, especially with adolescents, like, if you're not, like, changing in some way, like, if you're not, if everything is the same as 10 years ago, then, like, something's wrong. I'm not going to tell you should go this way or that way, or let go of this, or put on more boundaries in this. Just things need to be moving internally with you. And if it's not moving, like you talk about that's often, like if you're not in the tension, that means that you've let go of yourself and
Given up.
yeah.
Yeah, tension represents like I'm engaged.
Yeah.
I'm a part of the journey.
And that goes into our next topic of expectations.
Yeah, and unconditional love.
Unconditional love. Speaking of the tension.
Yeah, for sure. It's I feel like one of the hotter topics today.
Yes.
You've seen it written about in the magazines,
Yeah.
Mishpacha and Ami.
Yeah.
All this dialogue between, what does unconditional love really mean?
Yeah.
And
How far do you go with it?
Right. Could we have expectations? Could we not have expectations? And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the narrative. It's very easy to get caught up in like which camp are we on? Are we on we believe that unconditional love is a necessity? Or are we on the other side where it's all about expectations? And I often find that narrative certainly removes us from ourselves. It takes us away from ourselves. It doesn't bring us closer to our own internal tension with these real fundamental questions, which is like, how do we love children when they're different from us? How do we love children when they act in ways that we may not fully agree with or we may not fully believe in? What exactly does that mean?
And what do they need from us as parents in that space? Do they just need, like endless love, unconditional, meaning it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You just love? Or is that idea of boundaries, expectations, goals, whatever you want to call it, that other side,
Right.
Like that other side that has now become almost like the evil side, or like it's almost like,
Don't speak about expectations.
Yeah, it's like bad,
I always find like debates like this, I find that they're often detrimental because we lose
yes,
nuance.
that's a
We
good
lose
point.
like the
They
fact.
polarize.
Yeah, like you have to make a choice. Am I here or am I there? And what's my fundamental belief, as opposed to where do I stand and how am I personally responding to this question? Because and I want to speak about that for a second, but I just want to share a story of one of the dear people I have like the honor to work beside, a client of mine, and it's a story of conditional love. And it's like as basic as it gets. When you're raised in a home where there are very clear expectations about this is how you need to be. And I could fill in the blanks with many people that I've worked with who sort of had this story in their background, where it was very clear to them that we need you to be a certain way. And you're going to secure love by being that way. And when you think about what that does to the self, the development of self, that I can't pay attention to my own inner heartbeat. I can't pay attention to my own inner flow. Rather, I need to externalize my being and focus on my behavior as opposed to who I am as a person. It's a real relinquishing of self. And so this particular man, he was raised in it's possible to refer to his father as a bit of a tyrant, a controlling man. And he certainly had his own history as to how he became that person. But it manifested in his family where there was a great deal of control. He needed his kids to learn X amount of time in the right type of way, in certain conditions. And a child needs to make a choice in that moment. Do I abide by this to secure the love, which is the most important factor a child needs, is just a feeling of my parents embrace me, they adore me, they believe in me? Do I forsake myself in order to acquire this love from my parent? Or do I lean into myself and become that? And again, to this day, he's still trying to identify his own self. Here he is, an adult, years later, with a family of his own. And it's hard for him to pause and listen to his own internal heartbeat, because he's primarily focused on what exists on the outside as opposed to what he actually is on the inside. And when you think about like what conditional love does to a person, I've seen people spend 60, 70 years of their lifetime sort of lost in this like matrix of who am I really? And they have a very hard time sort of landing. And if there's anything we could say, the gift of looking at a child and saying, I love you for who you are, as opposed to I need you to be something for me, is probably one of the most selfless gifts we could give to a child. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. It gives to them, it gives to their children. God willing, it gives to future generations as well. But I think we could very much get in this like theoretical dialogue with this question, where do you stand? And to me, I always prefer to personalize things. Like, let's ask ourselves a question of, why do we conditionally love people in a certain way? Why do we need our kids to be a certain way? What is it ultimately doing for us? And how could we pause for a moment and try to engage in a very different type of manner? And it reminds me of a story. And I really see that a lot of the conditions that we place upon our children are largely because of our own deficiencies, our own unresolved emotional conflicts. And I like to share some of my deficiencies, if that's okay. I know you love when I do this, but it's just who I am. We had an experience, as a therapist. Well, I think people know this already about therapists, but as a therapist, there are certain like things you look out for, certain opportunities that sort of represent a degree of success, and like you've made it somewhere. And I think when you open up one of the magazines and they have like a Pesach program or a Sukkot program, and you see like a therapist there,
It's true.
I think most people kind of like look right past it. I don't think they're paying too much attention.
But therapists stop.
Every therapist I know stops and like, why that guy? What about me? Why wasn't I called? And I remember we had that moment where we were called and said like, why don't you come and speak at a program?
Right, it was fun.
And yeah, it was wonderful, and it was a great opportunity, and I also got lost. I'm just going to speak about myself because I think I had a very different process than you. I think you were much more grounded. I think it meant something different to me, and maybe a lot more to me based on who I am as a person and where I come from in this world. I never saw myself as a person who would be capable or worthy enough of being someone who could impart these ideas to others enough that they would really want to listen to it. That's my own internal wounds, my own insecurities that I carry. And I think that's why, as a therapist, I choose to travel alongside my clients as opposed to like place myself up on a perch and say, I sort of figured it out. Because internally, I don't relate to myself as someone who sort of figured it out. That's a part of my own story, and I'm working on it.
Well, you're saying it has given you the humility to be aside.
Yeah, I think it has. It certainly has its pros. It has its struggles as well. And I want to speak for a moment about the struggle. I remember, so we're going to this program, this beautiful Pesach program. I think as a child, like the idea of going to a Pesach program was a big deal. And I noticed as we were preparing, like this inner tension just building in me. Like, we're again the therapists in this place, and we're going to need to be a certain way, and we're speaking about different topics, so we're going to be looked at like, are we doing it the same way? And I kept having these like fears, like what if we're going into shul and my kids have like these grape juice stains on their shirt, or we're leaving
because our kids don't spill grape juice on themselves.
Yes, they never do that. We've trained them properly that they're just always
like there's
meticulous.
No paint on the table.
Yeah, they don't see the floor, the paint. But there is from one paint night, remember that?
You actually mean that.
There is. There was a single paint night and there's still paint on the floor. And I notice it every time. But that's my own work, and then we're doing okay with it. But so there was this like feeling that I had as we were approaching Pesach. Like it wasn't filled with peace, it wasn't filled with serenity or joy. It was filled with fear. That what if I feel uncomfortable? And what I noticed real quickly in my children, and this is the beauty of children, that they know us at times better than we even know ourselves.
Yes.
And my two oldest, the two boys, like they picked up on my insecurity, and they kept like kind of like rubbing it in my face a little bit.
And they were young.
Yeah, they were young.
Yeah.
And they kept like yeah, I remember one of them got dressed and like he did his buttons wrong. And he's like, Abba, what do you think of this? And of course, I just want to enjoy it and have a good time. But I found like my need for them to be a certain way was, which is what we would call conditional love. That's what we would call it. In that moment, it was an experience of conditional love. I needed them to be a certain way to quiet my own insecurities. And I placed attention upon them that they didn't deserve, they didn't need. And I think that we ultimately, but it was coming from myself, my own feelings of, am I really good enough? Am I valuable enough? Will people see me in a regard that I'd like to be seen, or will they see me as a human being with flaws? And in that moment, for whatever reason, I didn't want to be perceived as a person with flaws. I wanted to be seen as sort of put together. And I was forsaking myself. And worst of all, I was forsaking my children. And I think one of the beautiful parts of this story is that there was a tension and we were able to speak about it. And we ultimately made that decision to say, well, it's mostly me, like until I kind of work it out, we shouldn't place our children in such a position where they're uncomfortable with it. And obviously we've gone to other programs since, and I've gotten to a better place with it. But it's just amazing to kind of look at this story of conditional or unconditional love, not from the vantage point of our own cognition. What do we believe in? What's correct? But rather, look at that question with a mirror before us and say, what is going on with me? Why do I need my kids to be a certain way? Why do I impose certain beliefs on them? And I think the more we ask ourselves that question, the more we're going to realize that it's our own work. And if we do that well enough and we're aware enough of who we are as people, then we're going to have much less of a need to impose these sanctions upon other people that give them that sense of ultimate loss in who they are. And I want to finish with one little story with this element. I was speaking to a boy recently, this beautiful, alive, Hasidic boy who was struggling with different yeshivas, one after the next. It just really wasn't working out for him. And when you speak to most kids about their experience, especially at 16, 17 years old, they have a lot of rage and a lot of anger towards the system. And speaking with him, I didn't catch any of that. And at some point I asked him, I'm like, you seem to be so okay with the fact that at times you're mistreated and at times you're spoken to in a very derogatory way in the systems that you're in. And how are you okay with that? And he looked at me with like this blank, like this face of knowledge and understanding, like a serenity. And he said, like, I'm always supported in my home. And my parents have my back. They believe in me. And because of that, even though I'm in this environment where sometimes I feel like I'm being beaten up, and he is beaten up there at times, but at the same time, he carried with him this sense of, we got your back. And it makes life so much more enjoyable, simpler, more effective, with a sense of self, a sense of being. And it's just a beautiful story. So we almost need a new definition when we talk about this. Clearly, we have a belief system. We have a Torah that guides us. We can't ignore that. We can't forsake that. It gives us form as to what's right and what's wrong. And when we talk about unconditional love, it comes into the face of some of these other ideals that we also carry. And how do we imbue that within our family? And I think that to switch the word a little bit, instead of unconditional love to unconditional belief, which is a term that I sort of lean into. We need to unconditionally, and I don't have any conflict with this at all, we need to unconditionally believe in our children, believe in their capacity, and that's about them. It's not about us, because we're filled with insecurities, we're filled with flaws. But when it comes to raising children, they're not there yet. They're just in a state of pure innocence and pure goodness. So it's not so much about that love, because sometimes we're incapable of giving love because we're caught in our own narrative. But unconditional belief extends beyond who we are as people. And it places the responsibility on our ability to love our children, as opposed to confronting our own sense of self or our lack of sense of self.
Yeah. And I think that last point that you made about them versus us, I think that's the main differentiation between, is it when it comes to, teaching our children, because a parent needs to also be a teacher. We need to guide them. They need our guidance, like you're saying. They need to be taught what to do, otherwise they're also lost. They need us for the rights and the wrongs. But I think like the key in what you're saying is it for me, so that for my own insecurity, so that I don't have to face myself? Or is it because I want you to be taught? I want this for you because this is good for you. And I think that learning the difference between those two is a constant, it's like a sharpening tool. And it has to get more and more nuanced, and then the challenge in figuring that out sometimes becomes more and more core, where you have to question even more core ideas inside you, like what is mine here and what is yours? Like what, and also it makes you kind of have to fine tune your own ideals. Like what is the main message I want to hold on to, and what is peripheral, what is external, what is the less something is defined by what it's not, the more it is going to be defined by what it is. So the more then it makes us need to fine tune our own, what are the messages we want to teach them, and what is it, and most importantly, what is about them and what is it about us? Because,
where do we end and they begin?
Yes, because part of, like you said, like part of belief is in the child being seen in his highest self. And, one of my, I've had many teachers, and one of my biggest teachers was this girl that I remember she came in the first session with her father, and there was, and she was struggling, and she was mistreating herself in the world, and she was using many means of doing that. And the thing that bothered her father the most, for some reason, it was interesting. He probably has his own story with it, right? I never learned his story, but she did. Was smoking. Like for some reason, the fact that she was a smoker, despite other dangerous things she was doing, bothered him the most. And we ended up speaking a lot in the first session about her smoking. And eventually, he let go of that. And he kind of leaned into just giving her space and quieting the tension in the home and quieting the fights. And that gave her space to grow. It gave her space to listen to that heartbeat that you talk about, and to listen and lean into herself. And to, and it, she no longer was fighting all the time with her parents, so she could start to fight with her own self and to start to win some battles. And eventually it also externalized, and some of her behavior started to be kinder to herself. She felt enough love to herself that she started to treat herself with more respect. And one of the first things that she gave up was smoking. And I remember that moment when she told me, Doc, guess what? Last night was my last cigarette, or whatever the context was, I don't remember. And at some point I asked her, have you told your father? And this was one of the saddest moments that I've ever encountered. She said, my father, he has long given up on me. Somehow that lack of expectation didn't translate into love. It translated into looseness.
Like apathy.
Into nothing matters. Like, we don't expect much from you. We just want you to stop fighting. And that lack of expectation translated for her as in, like, I don't matter, that they don't see much in me. They've given up on me. They don't see the non-smoker in me anymore. They no longer think that I could be that. And
they gave up on the best self that she could ultimately be.
So I think that this is the tension in parenting, is to be able to be okay in the child's worst self, while at the same time never losing sight of their best self, and respecting them in their journeys and their struggles, and also respecting them in the best self they could be, is part of love. Is part of love. That's a way to love another. When a 2-year-old comes home with when a 5-year-old writes one sentence, I love you, mommy, and the mommy says, like, wow, it's amazing. It's your first sentence and it's spelled wrong, but like the mom celebrates that with her child. The child believes it, and the child internalizes it and says like, wow, I just did something great, and my mom sees it. But let's say a 10-year-old writes a messy paragraph that could be done better. And the child knows it, like you said, like they know it. But the mother celebrates it anyway, externally, in a non-genuine way. The child doesn't feel celebrated. The child feels placated. The child feels quieted.
Almost disrespected.
Exactly, almost disrespected. And what the child wants is the sense of, oh, they see that see how much greatness I have in me, that how they see the bigness in me, that I am bigger than now, that my bigness is greater than my challenge. And that also, you know, we talk about self-confidence. I think that this is one of the concepts that I still remember from grad school that was meaningful to learn, that self-confidence is really self-efficacy. It's the idea that I can do hard things. And the way that you learn that you can do hard things is by doing things that are hard for you. And things that are hard for you means that they're not comfortable for you. So something needs to push you to do that. And something needs to propel you to do that, not so that you can gain your parents' love. It's not conditional in that sense, but it's part of it so that you can build your own self-respect, so you can gain your own love in a way. And that you can teach yourself, like, if I can do this, I can do anything. I know how to do hard things. So I think that differentiation between, is this for me or is this for my child? And then kind of keeping tabs on this, like, you know, containment and goals and expectations and teaching at the same time, being in the tension of that, I think is like a key space to remain in. We can't abandon that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like tolerating the imperfection,
Mm-hmm.
but not losing sight of the best self that could
Yes.
exist within a person.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a lot of tension to hold on to. Yeah.
That's what it is. Parenting well is parenting intention.
Yeah, not abandoning the fight. I remember there was a program, we were talking about technology in a school I was doing
Yeah.
some work with.
Yes.
And
this is, I love it when you talk about this idea.
Yeah, the catchphrase of the program was staying in the tension.
Yes.
Meaning we're not resolving this issue, but we don't want to get too comfortable with it. We want to remain tense because in that tension, we're going to have an honest battle with ourselves. And most of us, we forsake that. We simply give up because it's too intolerable for us. But staying in, as you're saying, is really the key. I just want to move a little bit to, and I always appreciate a little bit of this next idea that I wanted to share is that, and I'll start with a story. We had a moment. I find this like a little, you know, these moments like these kisses from Hashem, like these little beautiful gifts that you get that you didn't ask for, they just came your way. And I remember, I forget the circumstance, but it was in the living room, right next to this room. And our children, they wanted something. I don't know, they wanted to go somewhere, they wanted an experience, and whatever it might have been. And I just happened to have walked into the room as they were having like a child conference amongst themselves.
Sibling meeting.
A sibling meeting. They got together. I don't think it was like officially called for,
Right.
but they were talking. And I walked into the room when they were speaking about, and they were sharing with each other which child
Yes.
should go to which parent, and what should they say to get their means met. You know, to get the trip or to get the whatever it is that they wanted at the time. And I remember walking into the room and I had the biggest smile on my face because they were so right.
We're so transparent.
We were so transparent to them. They knew exactly what to say, which child to send, how they should say it, and they were spot on. And I remember just like giving them a kiss, saying like, "You're not getting this because you're busted." But I love this moment. I love what it represents, and to me, what it represented is like, you know, we talk about like a unified front and sort of being the same. And however much we try to do
Consistent,
that.
being consistent. That's
Right.
like the big word.
Right, but I think
As parents, like being consistent with the kids.
yeah,
Yeah.
like together, we're in it, and we have the same belief, we have the same approach, we have the same set of expectations of our kids. And I think you read so much about this idea that parents need to hold this unified front.
Always agree about all the details around it.
Right. And here we are having this moment, this little snippet of an experience with our children. And there they are, sort of like flipping that whole theory, upside down on its face, saying, we see right through that.
Yes.
We know exactly how you feel. We know what you believe in. We know what matters to you. We know the type of way we should say what we should say in order to speak to your sense of individuality. And I think it's clear, I hope that it's clear, even in this conversation, that you and I think we think very similarly in many respects, but we're very different human beings. We come from different places. And if anything, we're trying our best to celebrate that, and to not pretend that it's anything but difference. That we could believe in the same objectives and the same goals, but as human beings, we're going to approach it differently. Our pathways to our own development of self, our own emotional health, they were different. We come from different countries, different universes.
Many couples do, even when they don't.
Yeah. Yeah, even if they come from the same block, they're sort of different.
Different countries.
And it was that teaching that our children gave us, that lean into your individuality, lean into the fact that there are differences, and the fact that there are different ways to approach things. And by doing so, they already know, but by doing so, we're actually honoring ourselves, as opposed to like trying to force ourselves into this posture that is not really genuine to who we are. And I think learning to develop a relationship that could tolerate those differences.
And celebrate them, respect them.
Yeah, that we don't need to be the same.
Yes.
We could believe in the same things, but we don't need to approach it the same exact way.
Right.
And because I think our children gave us permission to be this, that they taught us that even if you attempted to, we're going to see right through it.
Yeah, but I think we also worked on that, love.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, our children taught us, but I know that, we both bring different things to this table. And I think a lot of times when our message as a parent, or our power as a parent, our impact as a parent gets threatened by the other parent, then the instinct is to quiet the other parent's voice, to make it weaker. And in doing so, you're just defensive and weakening, and then you just end up having two weak parents.
Right.
And I think that, this is something that I know that, like you're talking about how parenting has been humbling from the kids, but it has also been humbling for me as co-parenting with you. That whenever, now this is much more intrinsic, but because I've learned it now, it's become more natural. But even in a place where I just didn't agree with your point of view, whenever the spaces where I've just paused and really leaned in and listened, what's the sense in what you're saying? What is the new point that I'm having a hard time integrating, that I'm too threatened by, that's threatening my sense, that's threatening my approach, that's even my vision, or even even feels like even our child.
Even the belief about what's right and wrong.
Yeah, that if I just pause and really lean into that and try to hear it from a place of curiosity, from a place of honor and respect, then there's always something that I learn and I respect. And in that way, you've taught me to be a better parent in many ways, 1,000%. Because you've taught me all the things that I needed to learn. And also in my quieting myself, I've heard more, I've been able to, hear my own authenticity better. Where, like I was saying before, I had to sharpen and kind of get rid of and shed the parts that were not necessary and were in the way. Yeah. And I think that when you also do that for me, where you listen into what's the nuance here?
Yeah, well, what's the teaching you could give to me?
Like then we end up offering to our kids two nuanced and different parents, and they need us both.
Right. They need us both to be authentically ourselves.
Yeah.
And communicate together so we could find a way to discover what the other
Right.
is asking or could teach us about our role.
Yeah. And I loved like how you changed the words to belief with the unconditional. I would say here, like maybe to change it from parents needing to be consistent to parents needing to be really respectful. And I think the word respect has the piece of like seeing you as another for me, you know, kind of weaving it back to the beginning of our discussion here. Seeing you as separate from me in this journey, and also honoring you as a father, and hearing and learning from you as a parent, and in having enough humility to quiet and re-listen to my own voices and question my own voices, while at the same time, like you're saying, finding even a more authentic self. So when you do that, you not only empower each other to be a better parent, you also end up being, like you're saying, more authentically and more powerfully you.
Create room to lean into our authenticity.
Yes. So instead of then having two disempowered parents, you have two more powerful parents that are more uniquely them.
Yeah. It's so nice speaking about the journey.
Yes, it's
I think if
true.
anything this conversation represents is like a lot of our journey together and trying to do what's best and right and
Stumbling along the way many times.
many stumbling.
With
We'll continue
scraped knees.
to yeah. But at least we're trying to remain present.
Yes.
And together in this journey. And I just want to end. Do you have any final thoughts?
The piece that just came to me that I feel like I can't not share almost in the piece that in my most humble spaces where there is that complete newness and complete aloneness with your own self as a parent, that the only place that grounds me is that I have a relationship with God. I feel like it would be really hard to parent without that. A relationship, you know, in whatever level of nurturing that comes to you.
Yeah.
That's a place that I go to and sometimes I say like, God, you love my child even more than I love him, which is like hard to grasp. And that like, and you love me. And you love me as a parent, like you love me, you chose me as the parent of this child.
And you accept me.
And you accept me and you expect of me and all of that. And to when I lean into that, I often find newer spaces there and comfort there and movement there. I feel very grateful that I have that. I would be really, really lost, even more lost without it. Yeah.
Well, thank you for this moment. And thank you, Amudim, for this opportunity. Guys, please give generously. This is a program that is saving lives on a daily basis. And this is our moment, sharing with you part of our journey. But we're all in this together. Everyone, I imagine, has similar conversations, similar dialogue about what's best. And we hope and pray that we find peace and comfort and love in our homes. And continue to think about the journey and the process, and with Hashem's help, we'll bring more love and peace into our own hearts and into the hearts of our children and all our people.
Yes, and I just want to join you in, you know, as when you mentioned like, you know, do you want to do this with Amudim? Like, I don't even pause. Like, if there's anything we can do for Amudim, it feels like such an opportunity. How can we not do it? Because it's done for the right reasons, with the right approach, and there is so much thought and professionalism and love and genuine care that goes into it, and I don't even know, hundreds of it, and to invest anything that we can in Amudim, I know will yield, generational results. You know, when you invest in a human being, you invest in forever, and I do believe investing in Amudim means that.
Yes. Thank you very much.
L'chaim, babe.
L'chaim. Cheers.